objects. I consider this to be a theological kind of thinking, and more accurately, more exactly, negative theological. In this in-between transcendence and immanence, the connecting between is already at work. I work persistently between the secular and the religious, between humanity's tradition and revealed religion. This makes for a theological criticism of literature, or for reading literature as revelation in a critical approach that I locate between philosophy and philology and propound as speculative philology. It comprises then also an apophatic philosophy and a negative theology. And I want to give you some examples. From work of my own, and I'm going to actually draw on the outline of a couple of books that were mentioned in the introduction. Just a few more comments here on our position between disciplines, periods, divinity, humanity. About being between periods, whether you're working with classical texts, medieval, Renaissance, you're always doing it here and now, today. That's always already present in the period that you're studying. You cannot help but react on the period that you're trying to access. So I think that we're inevitably working between, in terms of the periods that we relate together in the work of an association consecrated to these three major areas. Of course, they communicate with each other, and you cannot but consider any of them except from a position of between. We're also between worlds. The world is other. We have to learn to approach this world as other, as mediated by heaven, rather than as simply immediately given. All right, this is the way in which I would propose that we should think of the world as an other. The more you examine it, in science as in any other kind of discipline, it opens up into an other world, one that didn't fit into the framework and the concepts that we brought to the examination initially, and we discover this world as other. We're always working between this world and the other world, other worlds. Now Dante will give us a full-blown imagination of the other world as other worlds, heaven, hell, and purgatory. That's what the imagination can do, starting with this universal predicament of always relating to an other world. Because the world, any way we grasp it, always is and becomes other to us, especially since we're in time and on our way towards a future, which is an other time with respect to this world. So we cannot but imagine this world as other. And I've mentioned the interdisciplinarity, which I also think unifies scholars in the areas that we're dealing with here. We're working between literature and theology, or revelation, between philosophy and theology, philology and philosophy, poetic language and the divine word. Interdisciplinary philology operates between humanity and divinity. That might seem to be a matter of very subjective individual choice. Not everyone believes in God and in what God, of course. And yet, I want to see all of these alternatives, all of the different kinds of disciplines, really all of the betweens that I've evoked as being versions of the humanity, divinity between. Because in some ways, we're always between the known and the unknown. And that's really what, it's all we're able to say about divinity, is that it's the unknown. Of course, we can elaborate that and do, and poets and and thinkers and rites of religion. They give us a colorful experience of this divine, but always, in the end, it is the unknown. So, whatever our beliefs are, I think as interdisciplinary scholars, there's always this dimension that can be figured as humanity, divinity, because we're always, in some ways, moving from the known towards the unknown, and we're suspended between them. We're on a bridge that we're building. And we don't know what it is anchored to on either one side or the other. Now, this is what opens up the space of the imagination. Literary form operates between humanity and divinity, opening the known to the unknown. Literary form becomes a revelation of divinity by embodying and alluding to the unknown. Now, the first book that I wanted to go through, I think, tries to detail this between space in terms of literary genres. And I turn to the Bible. Right? A Theology of Literature. Bible is revelation in the tradition of the humanities from 2017. Let's see, do we see the succession of chapters? Yeah. I start here with Genesis. Genesis, the book of Genesis, addresses the unknown and unanswerable question, where do we come from? Right? This is the province of myth. The myth of creation, mythos, that means story. Right? So I've just taken it in a neutral, literal sense of a narration. But it's a narration about the fundamental conditions of existence. And it's the first chapters of Genesis are mythical. Right? We have the fall in the garden, Noah's Ark, up to really the Tower of Babel. We're very much in a mythic vein, which is interpreting the unknown at an existential level of those fundamental conditions of existence concerning, for example, why are we sexed? What nu-ren, nan-ren? That is a fundamental condition of our existence as well, and that has consequences that are played out in that story between Adam and Eve in the garden. We're dependent, vulnerable. This maybe exposes us and even disposes us to sin. It's a condition of being, of createdness, or we could call it thrownness in Heidegger's vocabulary. We're thrown into the world. Where do we come from? Well, Genesis interprets that in terms of createdness, right? Our being is dependent on a wholly other, transcendent being who is God. So that's the first genre, myth. And then I consider Exodus as a genre of narrative history, of epic history. But it too is probing the unknown. It's probing our unknown origins somewhat more concretely, asking where do we come from historically as a nation. Right? This is the Hebrew people, but as exemplary for any people. It's a different kind of a question, but it's still one that is starting with the contemporary facts as they were experienced at the time that Exodus was written, actually earlier than Genesis. Those speculative philosophical questions come up after society has established itself with a certain stable existence, and that's really what Exodus is about, going out from Egypt and coming into a land where this nation can found and establish itself and first forge a kind of national consciousness with a destiny. But that too is the unknown, right? Projecting towards the destiny that is imaged in the history of the past. That's how we move between the known and the unknown in this second generic form of epic history. And then, of course, we have the prophecies. And really, all of the Bible is prophetic. These genres are not discrete. They merge together. But in the prophetic books, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, we have the voice of God speaking directly in the form of oracles. Thus saith the Lord. And this divine speech is poetic, very highly poetic. Really, in all of the prophets, Isaiah is one who stands out in this regard. The revelation of the prophets comes essentially in poetic language, speaking into specific situations of human beings in history. So, there is this coming from a transcendent height into the concrete, immediate human situation. Again, I think that prophecy is another strong link in this chain of betweens. It's very often archetypal when we think of, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou brought down to the ground, who didst weaken the nations? This is Isaiah, speaking in an archetypal kind of language, the fall of Satan, cosmogony, but also with reference to the king of Babylon in poetic figures, moving between that universal archetypal level and more historically specific references. Now, whereas prophecy is the voice of God speaking to humans in the writings, right? Psalms, Proverbs, we have the human voice. However, it's the human voice in relation to divinity. You might say, well, human beings talking about their fears and joys and miseries and exaltation. You have all of this in the Psalms. What does that have to do with God? Or how can that be inspired? The Bible is supposed to be inspired. Well, it's the fact that human beings speaking about being human, the experience of being human, when it's done in relation to God, it becomes a kind of revelation. It's in that between space that is the space of revelation. I wanted to meditate just a moment about Ecclesiastes, which is among these writings, and it's a philosophical discourse, really. Right? That would be its genre of human reasoning about the vanity of the world. You know this book, Vanity of Vanities. All is vanity, saith the preacher. And one wonders, how can this be in the Bible? How could this possibly be a revelation of God and His providential purposes for the world and human life? Well, ironically, I think it's by showing the futility of human reason and its circuits, bringing everything back to itself. Right? I said to myself, says the preacher, what profit have I if another is going to come after me and take my place? I believe that this book has an ironic rhetoric that operates as a reductio ad absurdum. It's the discourse of how everything is vanity, everything is vain, if you look at it from a purely human point of view, only on the basis of human reason, just seeing the finite. Yes, you're going to die, and in the end, nothing is worthwhile. The book is showing the limits of human reason, the futility of human reason, not of life or of the world as a whole. There are certain phrases in Ecclesiastes that counterpoint that despairing philosophical discourse. You have a phrase like, light is sweet, and truly it is a pleasant thing for the eyes to behold the sun. That breaks in. Period. It's not, I thought, it's an immediate perception that escapes the net of philosophical reasoning that turns on its own circuits and turns everything into vanity. It's in those phrases that another perspective and voice a poetic voice escapes the circularity of self-referential human reasoning. And I want to mention perhaps the Song of Songs as well. This lusciously, voluptuously erotic poem or ensemble of poems that many people also have a hard time seeing how this can really be part of the Bible. I would take it as the infinite degree of sensuality that itself becomes a revelation of the infinite, and therewith of God. That this absolute, total enthusiasm, joy and exaltation in being human, in the sensation, in the ecstasy of sex, this becomes a revelation of the infinite love of the Creator. So this is another way in which I think the human discourse is able to link with divine revelation, the Word of God in the Bible. And the last genre that I discuss here is the Gospel, which I think synthesizes, recapitulates, brings all of these genres together. We speak of the gospel truth. The gospel reveals the truth manifest in lives of human beings, the way in which their lives are transformed. The miracles, of course. Do we believe those miracles? Well, I think what we can believe is the transforming power of the presence of Christ for those that are healed, of the power of love to transform. I think this is really what the gospel is witnessing to. It becomes prophetic. There's a history. There's certainly a biographical history, and of course the historical moment of Jesus in Nazareth and Jerusalem comes into focus. There are mythical elements in the gospel. It really is the culmination, I think, of an intergeneric reading between the secular and the sacred in ancient, that would then sum up the various genres I've touched on. Now, I want briefly to try and extend this one step further to some pagan traditions, secular writers, who are also reading between the secular and the sacred in ancient and medieval literature, up to the Renaissance, with Dante. This is this third book, right? The Revelation of Imagination from Homer and the Bible through Virgil and Augustine to Dante. Homer's musings and the Divine Muse. Already you have the two together. Homer's musings, that means his reflections, his thinking becomes the locus for an apprehension of the divine. It's Homer's musing. He's giving us the whole Trojan War and its aftermath. This is ambiguity between it's what Homer thinks and sees, but it is also asserted with earnestness as the word of truth, as the revelation of the divine muse. And this ambiguity between the divine and the human works all through Homer. This is really the charm and the compelling power of Homer, is that you can see the action of the gods working in and through human beings when they go berserk, when their arete is beyond all limits. It was the god who had possessed that warrior. Now, of course, there is then the attempt to carve out a space of autonomy for human beings, emblematized by Odysseus, who becomes, in some ways, the first secular human being. But he, too, is beholden to the gods in so many ways. The raft that he makes with his own hands in order to venture upon the sea, it's actually Circe who gives him, Calypso, who gives him all of the tools, and Homer says that over and over again, so that you realize it's the gods and their gifts that make this possible. Secularization occurs in Homer as the epiphany of the divine within the world. Virgil takes us then into takes this epic model of revelation into the historical realm and into history as prophecy. His typological history of Rome is the revelation of a divine destiny. Aeneas becomes the archetype of Augustus, Caesar. Virgil is composing and reading his poem to Augustus. It's about Aeneas, but it's actually telling Augustus how he should act. Aeneas is the archetypal model, and not Augustus, but the whole Augustan age, Virgil's contemporaries, are seeing themselves in a kind of prototype in Aeneas. They're seeing the Roman future figured as this mythic past. And in fact, past and future communicate with each other. In Virgil's prophetic poem, he gives us actually all of Roman history up to his own time, right, from the origins, in the form of a prophecy, right? At the end of book 6, when Aeneas meets his father, and he sees everything that he and his actions are destined to produce in the final glory of the Roman Empire. Of course, there are a lot of undertones. There's this whining voice of regret. Virgil is himself overwhelmed by the consequences of war. But there's the official voice of Roman glory and the triumphant march, which always goes together with those two. Now, the real point that I want to emphasize here is how the divine and human work together in a totally different way from Homer. We're also in a dimension here of freedom. The future is an unknown. Because it is freely to be made. And prophecy, Virgilian prophecy, speaks into this moment that is determining for our future. This is the moment of action. Prophecy is not just telling you what is inevitably going to happen automatically. It's making an appeal. This is also true in the Bible. When there is the language of this is going to happen automatically, that's only the surface. The real point of prophecy is to convert, right? That you may return to Yahweh, to God, or to the Roman pantheon and rectify the course of history. All of this takes a new subjective turn with Augustine in the Confessions. Revelation, there is also even an epic kind of journey in Augustine, the epic of his own soul. And he opens up a dimension of subjective reflection which becomes itself a kind of revelation. It's not only on the stage of history, it's in the individual soul and its reflection upon itself that God becomes present, right? All of the confessions are spoken in dialogue with God. God is present in this discourse of Augustine reflecting upon himself, going over his past, and then projecting it towards the future. We have the exegetical books and the speculative philosophical books. That's books 9 through 13 after the autobiography. Actually, 1 through 9 are autobiographical, and the 10 through 13 turn that corner. But I think the main contribution that Augustine makes to this tradition unfolding to Dante is opening up that subjective dimension of revelation that Dante is going to expand and combine with the epic journey to the underworld. Dante takes the 11th book of the Odyssey and then the 6th book of the Aeneid, the journey ad inferas, right, the descent to hell, and he blows it up into the whole of the Divine Comedy, right? All three parts. And that's the revelation. But Dante reveals to us those other worlds always as this human world taken to its ultimate consequences. What we're doing in time, sub specia aeternitatis, right? Under the aspect of eternity. He's between these worlds. Everything that Dante represents to us is the human world that we live, but projected towards this unknown other realm. And it's really between, and it's the tension between those two, that Dante's representations, his poetic creations, become revelatory. Yeah, no, I realize we're really at the end of time. Maybe that's enough. I'll just give you a concluding statement here in that case. I tried to give you my version here of doing philology and philosophy between humanity and divinity. I'm a theological thinker, and I twist or shape that into being a speculative philologist. However, this is not theology as a choice exclusive of secular humanism. On the contrary, my theological thinking consists in dialogue with, and even interpenetration and convertibility with, humanist philology. That's why I welcome the invitation to speak to this organization on this topic, between humanity and divinity, and to give you my approach to what I consider to be most decisive for our time and global predicament. Thinking between the human and the divine is imperative for understanding our worldwide culture going forward in our post-secular era. Good. Thank you very much. I hope I've left time for a few questions. Good. Thanks.
I think we still have time to for maybe 2 questions, right? Okay. Please raise your hand and let us know your university, your affiliation, and also your question, please. Yes.
Hi, Carolyn Scott from National Chindong University in Tainan. I really appreciate everything that you said in your talk because it clarified things that I had thought as well. But one of the things I noticed as you were kind of in the middle of things, how, and I understand why you're structuring things this way, but how everything was in a binary, East and West, or philosophy and literature. And is what you're doing trying to get us beyond binaries, or are binaries essential?
Right, we're always in binaries even as we attempt to undo them. I guess the idea is not to stay confined by them, but you're right, the very nature of language is binary, and thinking too, as a consequence. So I don't think we can really avoid using binaries. The idea of apophatic thinking is to try to recursively double back and undo those binaries. And if binaries consist of 2 terms, each having a specific content, by negating that specific content, the finite is a word, we have infinite. And that negation then opens a space that is not itself subject to treatment by binaries. It doesn't fit into the binaries, but the only way of evoking it, I think, is by using some kind of language concept. And there, you're right, we're in binaries. So there's always this catch-22, and it's all a matter of how you can move in it, through it. And I don't really have formulas or prescriptions for that. That's our art. The art of being a humanities scholar is using binaries in a way that makes them, that opens them, makes them rich, rather than just shutting down thought and discourse.
Yes.
Just to follow up on what Carolyn, Brian Reynolds from the university, to follow up on what Carolyn said and what you were saying, if you take a Trinitarian model, you have the notion of spirit as relationship between Father and Son, and you also took the notion of relationship as absolutely fundamental. So I wonder if within that one could find something also you find between, in Taoism, between yin and yang. Yin and yang is binary, but they are in relationship to each other, and within that there is a third.
Absolutely, essentially in relation to each other, that's right. That's a good example of how we need a binary in order to symbolize really the beyond binaries in yin and yang. And the Trinity gives us another conceptual vocabulary for placing relationship first, rather than the substances that are being related. The whole genius of the doctrine of the Trinity is to stress that being is a matter of relationships, all the way to its core. The highest instance of being, God, the Godhead itself, is already constituted as relationship between Father and Son and Holy Spirit. This is a radical revolution in the history of thinking that overturns the substance metaphysics that had been produced by Aristotle and Greek philosophy. There's something that is inert and static about substance. It doesn't have to be that way. You can think that Spinoza can give us a dynamic sense of substance, but it's really because of incorporating relationship into the very nature of substance, and that is done in such a manifest and moving way by the